Call the annual budget adoption meeting to order. Ms. Shope, could we please get a roll call for attendance?
Absolutely. Tia Johnson,
Present.
Brian Nichols,
Here.
Brian Anderson,
Here.
Greg Schneider,
Present.
Amy Levy,
Here.
Sean Levy, and Megan Miller.
Present.
All members are present except Sean Levy at this time.
Thank you very much. That takes us to 1C, the approval of the agenda. Would a member like to move to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's motion by Ms. Johnson, second by Ms. Levy. Any discussion? Hearing none, all of those in favor of approving our agenda, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. That takes us then to item 2A, the 2023-2024 budget adoption. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Garrison.
Thank you so much, Board Vice President Miller. First of all, I'd like to say this has been a nice process for the school district of Beloit to kind of walk us through up to this point. We've been talking about the budget for a few months now. I know, believe it or not, we kind of started back in this conversation back after our referendum conversations back in April, I want to say May-ish time frame. Of course, we moved through the summer, and here we are with a preliminary budget. And naturally, from the preliminary budget, we come to our final budget. Typically, in a school year, we would probably like to see this all kind of wrapped up in early October. But as we all know, there were some new things that were happening with us here in the school district, in which myself and my team, I should say, was really engaged in some conversations at the state level, trying to solidify additional funds for the school district. With that being stated, naturally, we are here today to approve our annual budget. This has been, again, a long process for us, but I do believe we've been able to deliver something that I believe the board will be amenable to. Naturally, we've worked through a lot of different questions, and we'll tackle some of those questions again tonight if there are any. But the main thing is that our district is in a financial conversation, and it's an ongoing financial conversation. And so when you have ongoing financial conversations, this is just a part of it, right? I know it says the annual budget. Some people think it's a finality to a budget. But what happens with a budget is you continuously work on it, throughout the rest of the year. This just gets us to this point where we can actually solidify where we are as a school district. I do believe we've made a lot of different changes over the year to get us to this point. Naturally, we start off with something around around $10 million last year to $4 million, and to get us somewhere closer to that $1 million or $2 million deficit. We worked real hard to kind of increase some of our conversations as it pertains to budgetary knowledge here at the board level, as well as budgetary knowledge for myself as a superintendent. Naturally, we did bring on, we had a consultant that started off with us, and naturally Mr. Chady is here with us now. And so our district has moved, and we also have an accountant now as well. And so our district has moved to be steady in this conversation as quickly and expeditiously as possible. It is my hopes that we will continue to have these conversations and to work to have, surplus budgets every year. I know one of the things is we talk about having a balanced budget. Of course, balance is breaking even, and I think our goal as a district is to have a surplus budget so that we can do other things that we would like to see done here in the school district. It also allows us to possibly put monies aside to do the things that we have to be able to take care of with inflationary conversations happening differently each year. And so naturally, again, we are here. I'd like to again thank everyone who has worked tirelessly in this conversation, to the entire business office, really working heavily hand in hand with me on some Saturdays as well, sometimes even Sundays. We'll have some detailed conversations about the budget, my team and I, and maybe it's not appropriate, but I would just like to thank everybody for extending themselves to me during those question times that I had preparing us for this budget. And so without further ado, that's my spiel. I always take about a couple of minutes just to kind of put us in the mind space around where we're going. Mr. Chady is going to take us through our annual budget. Please note, you're going to see some strike-throughs if you haven't seen this before, because it's showing the connection to what we had last to where we are now. And I thought that would be a good way to present the budget. Mr. Chady and I thought that would be a good way to present the budget because I think it allows everyone to see where the numbers are as it stands right now. And so, again, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Chady. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Garrison.
Just really quick before you get started, is it okay if we ask questions throughout, or do you want us to hold them to the end?
Perhaps throughout's okay. I'm okay with that, sure.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
Top of mind, yeah. Before I get in, I'd also like to extend my appreciation to Mark Duff, our former interim current consultant within the business office. Mr. Duff, I see, is online with us this evening in case there's questions that he perhaps might be better off to address as well. So we'll try to tackle those as they come up. Dr. Garrison commented a little bit about the presentation that's this evening. Board members were probably fairly familiar with this presentation. You've really seen it twice before. Once back in September when we adopted the preliminary budget on September 19th. That was then published in the Beloit Daily News on September 26th. The budget hearing was held on October 11th. And again, we saw the same presentation at that point in time. However, tonight you're going to see a similar presentation, some additional data, and in fact, you'll see some lineouts or some strikeouts in red reflecting budgetary estimates and assumptions that were utilized in the creation of that preliminary budget, though those estimates and assumptions have changed or become known really since that point in time. And those large known factors, just to kind of set the stage before we get into it here tonight, was membership calculation per the third Friday of September pupil count, of course, became known. The Department of Revenue certification of equalized property valuations for the school district of Beloit, along with the Department of Public Instruction certificate of state equalization aid, all became known really within the last month or so. In addition to that, the school district of Beloit learned of our ability to utilize the full $11,000 with the low revenue ceiling within the revenue limit. That was kind of a factor that also became known within the past 4 to 6 weeks or so, but it was not included at that level in the in the preliminary budget. So essentially what we're doing tonight is updating all of those estimates and assumptions with known values. There are some other minor budgetary adjustments made throughout the budget, but really nothing extraordinary or significant. So we'll begin by looking at some of those assumptions and challenges again. Starting with the top bullet, we talked about our declining membership. If you look at that second row there, you'll see 23-24, we had anticipated a decline to 6,216 members. And in reality, we ended up with 6,261 members. We had the last two digits right, just in the wrong order. We anticipated a reduction of 72 members. And in fact, our actual reduction was only 27. So that's beneficial. Within the revenue limit, it calculates based on a 3-year average. So you add up the 21, 22, 22, 23, and then this current 23, 24 membership, you divide that by 3, and it equates out to 6,333, which was an increase from the 6,318 that we used in the preliminary budget. That increase of 15 at $11,000 per member yields an additional $165,000 to the school district of Beloit within the revenue limit. So just kind of to put numbers to it for you. More importantly, perhaps when you look at the prior year, we had 6,334 3-year average. So we're really only down one individual, one member over prior year because of the 3-year rolling average. Also new, that $11,000 low revenue ceiling revenue limits increase. I'm sure that the board's fairly knowledgeable about that. In the preliminary budget, it was based on the former low revenue ceiling value, and then the addition of $325 per pupil as provided in the state biennial budget. That amount came to $10,364.15. So again, the change between what was in the preliminary budget and now using that 11,000 provides $635.85 additional cents for those pupils. In calculating that out, that comes out to about $4 million of new revenue. I'll point out that that revenue authority was provided by state statute as part of the biennial budget and other state legislation that occurred late this spring and over the summer. So we're simply utilizing the authority that the state legislature and the governor's office had signed off on in his current state law. Bullet number 3 talks about the use of $11.96 million of available ESSER federal funding. Those funds run out here at the end, in the end of September of 2024. It's likely that we'll utilize the majority, perhaps even all of them, here by June 30th of 2024, though we do have a 3-month carryover, so to speak, if we have funding that needs to carry over. Really important to point out, though, that while we're using almost $12 million of ESSER funds to really subsidize or to stabilize our 23-24 budget this year, that's good that we have it available. It's bad that $12 million is going to go away, and we're going to have to fill that hole going forward for the 24-25 school year. It won't quite be the full $12 million. We've got about $2.5 to $3 million of that earmarked for the Beloit Memorial High School HVAC project, which is kind of a one-time investment. So if we subtract that out, we're probably looking at around $9.5 million of ongoing expenses that we'll have to find other funding sources for next year. In the preliminary budget, we estimated that the equalized property valuation would increase 14.6% based upon the information we received from the Department of Revenue on October 1st. The increase was actually a little bit stronger than that at 16.07%. That's been factored into the revenue limit formula and helps in the determination of the mill rate, which we'll talk about later this evening. State aid was also reduced. While we had anticipated a reduction of just under $7,150,000, the October 15th certification actually received on October 13th from the DPI provided our general state aid with a reduction of just over $6.5 million. So we made adjustments to that. That doesn't necessarily impact the amount of money that we can receive within the revenue limit. However, it does distribute who pays for how much between local property taxpayers and state aid. So just to keep that or point that out and keep that in mind. The next bullet talks about salary adjustments to be determined pending negotiations with the Beloit Education Association. Those negotiations are continuing and ongoing. Originally, with the preliminary budget, we had included a 2% allowance for salary and wage increases for 23-24. With the original budget before the board this evening, we have increased that to a 4% allowance. Doesn't necessarily mean that's where we're going to end up. Could be more than that, could be less than that as a result of those negotiations, but it's important to point out to the board and the public that we do have resources set aside for that purpose. We also included savings due to changes in our health plan design, so those have been factored in, really no change from preliminary budget. Efficiencies and updates included due to school reconfiguration, again, very little change from the preliminary budget. And then finally, we speak to the expense increase. While we had originally estimated a $2.1 million to cover estimated independent charter school costs, and an additional $564,000 for open enrollment, the actual value for independent charter school costs comes in at about $1.8 million, so about a $300,000 to the good. So big picture, while we had assumed through some of the changes in the past history with the school district that we would continue to see exodus of students or members seeking other educational opportunities, kind of the talk of the town over the summer, so to speak, it really didn't materialize to what we thought perhaps could happen. So with that, we'll speak a little bit about some of the budget strategies. And again,
Mr. Chady, I'm
sorry.
so
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but I just want to pause. Did anybody have any questions on anything on that slide?
No, thank you for pausing. You actually answered the question because I was wondering, since we didn't have an amount for those pay increases, what had been factored in? And if I heard you correctly, you said 4%?
Currently, we have it in as a 4% allowance, correct?
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else?
I just want to note that it's a good thing that we did the work over the summer as well. I know we had some estimates there, and we had to project what we were getting. But the school district and the team worked, tirelessly to make sure that we were able to capture as many kids as we possibly could, making sure that our district is the district of choice. And I believe we did a phenomenal job, and I just want to make sure I put that thanks into the room from a principal perspective and a staffing perspective. A lot of people pulled together to make that summer look different for us here in the school district. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah,
Garrison.
that was just,
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, how's it going, Board Member Levy? Hop in.
that was just going to be my question about the declining membership. It did not decline as much as we had anticipated.
Yeah, that would be correct. And in fact, we'll see a slide here in a few that'll also speak further to the membership decline. But really, we had anticipated that we would see larger declines in membership, both going to charter schools and to open enrollment. And both of those were not as strong as what we had anticipated.
Okay. So more of our families are choosing to stay with us.
Well said.
I apologize, Board President Levy. I didn't see you hop in.
It's
Did anybody
okay.
else have any questions?
I mean, just kind of, as long as we're talking about enrollment, when we look at the enrollment number stayed fairly level, what we also have to remember is there are almost 100 fewer students of the school age that live within the school district of Beloit. So if we factor in that we have 28 fewer students possible in the district, the fact that the enrollment is really close means an awful lot more when we look at, we've made up that number of students that don't exist, that aren't even possible. And so that how much work that has done throughout the summer to make that happen, and greatly appreciate all of that effort to maintain that.
Thank you so much, Board Member Schneider. Board President Levy, I'm sorry, are you good? Awesome. All right, thank you, Mr. Chady.
All right, continuing on, we'll talk a little bit about some of the budget strategies. And again, very little change here from what was presented both at the preliminary budget adoption in September and then the budget hearing that occurred in October. So some expenditures, we had some reduced staffing here in the 23-24 budget, approximately 28 FTE throughout the district. And I would point out that I believe that there were 4 administrative positions that were a component of that FTE, assistant principal positions at Beloit Memorial. Well, I guess technically it came from McNeil, had 2 assistant principals. One of them transitioned to Beloit Memorial. And then,
I can help you with that.
Yeah, please
Sure,
do.
No problem. So technically, we had a position that was at McNeil. 2 assistant principals were given to us in the budget. Only 1 was filled, so that was a vacant position there. At the high school, there was a long-term vacancy there as well. We also had a vacancy over at the Merrill building, in which when I first got here, we were talking about moving a assistant principal there because that was our only assistant principal. That was our only building at the elementary level that didn't have an assistant principal. And we held that position due to various reasons. And that was also a vacant opportunity there as well.
yeah, thank you, Dr. Garrison. I had a sticky note someplace that explained those. And anyway, we also had reconfiguration savings as a result of that activity that took place over the summer. Department and school budget expenses, some of those had reductions that take place as well. And then on the corresponding side, revenues, again, using that $11.96 million of remaining ESSER federal funding, And then most importantly, quite honestly, is that increase in the low revenue ceiling within the revenue limit, utilizing the full $11,000 value there. So not to be overlooked, though, is that, again, that ESSER funding is going to go away here at the end of the 23-24 school year or into the first few months of the 24-25 school year, and will create some fiscal challenges for the district.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Board President Levy has a question. Go ahead.
Well, just a clarification, Dr. Garrison, I know it's a conversation point that we've had about the budget as we talked about the reducing of staffing, but you just kind of calculated and explained some of the cuts that did happen at the administrative level. Once again, cuts that did happen at the administrative level. So can you explain those again? Because I know that from our common narrative about what has happened, that there is, you know, like I said, we're board members, we're not involved in the day-to-day work, but there are some details about administrative positions that have been cut that people are not aware of. So I just ask you to speak to that with some clarity.
Sure. And so last year, naturally, as I just mentioned, that we did have some cuts in administration so we did have some cuts in those two positions that I was just able to explain. But if we do a even deeper narrative over the past 2 years, there have been at least 10 administrative cuts here in the school district in various positions. And so that's a more detailed conversation that I would like to have with the board, just to make sure that narrative is corrected. We have had cuts in administration over the past 2 years, just as we've had cuts and unfortunately in our staffing as well. I know you see 28 here, but if you look at over the past 2 years, that number boils up to like 94 or so staff members if you look at the past 2 years. So the previous year and then into this year, we've had over 94 plus staff cuts here in our school district and a little over 10 administrative cuts. At least 10 administrative cuts when you add the additional ones that I had this year. There's always changes that are made throughout the school year, and naturally when you're looking at contracts, administrative contracts happen in January. When I first got here in January, the administrators were put on one-year contracts to make some adjustments if needed based off of our deficit budget that we were working from up under. And so naturally there'll be additional conversations that we'll be having in the next few months. And when that time comes, you'll see, different conversations happening. However, at the current time, we have had administrative cuts to the tune of up to 10 over the past 2 years and over 94 teacher cuts over the past 2 years. And to me, all of that leads up to kind of where we are now.
May I just clarify?
Sure.
Are a lot of the cuts that you're talking about, is this like due to attrition and retirement kind of stuff? Or like, I just want to clarify for people who might be playing along at home.
Sure.
Could you just clarify how those cuts were made?
Sure. So for me, it's really about when we had to close 2 buildings naturally from the west side, we had to move those administrators into new positions. Mr. Lundin did fill a position that was over in the high school. That was a vacancy there. So to me, that's a 1-to-1. However, we also don't have McNeil anymore, and so that extra position that we had there was a vacancy that we never filled. And so that vacancy that we never filled at McNeil was open all year, and that we were able to save money there by having just 2 administrators versus 3. That same conversation can be had at the Merrill School building. At Merrill, they have been trying to find an assistant principal in that role for some time, as I understand it. And when I arrived here, that was one of my first conversations around solidifying the need. And of course, we did end up filling that need based off of the candidate pool that we had at the current time. Not to say that we didn't have any qualified people in the positions, but we also wanted to make sure the right person was in the position, right people were in the position as we made our decision, as I made my decision as a district administrator. And so that position was left vacant the entire year, which again, that's a vacancy. Again, I shouldn't say no one talked about it, but again, that vacancy was left there all year. We did what we needed to do to support the building from a district administration perspective, but that position was left vacant all year. And so when we moved the 2 schools to the west side of town, naturally 2 additional assistant principals had to be moved back into different positions, let's just say it like that, not to identify anyone. But two assistant principals had to be moved into two different conversations, which again, now those two positions were also in that sense eliminated to fill the transfers that I needed to make. To me, this is more about continuous conversations in this area, and we will continue to have conversations in this area. I know our needs are different from a lot of different other, the different school districts, I should say. And as I continue to work through where we are as a district, I will continue to make the necessary recommendations to the board when needed.
Did anybody else have any other questions before we let Mr. Chady continue here? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just one thing. So when we talk about vacancies versus actual cuts, because those are two different things. So I just want to make sure that people understand, when we say we've got 28 less FTEs budgeted, those positions no longer exist. They're not vacant positions, but there's still other positions that just happen to be unfilled. They're budgeted. The intent is to hire if we find the right person. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on what the different language there is, because we might have another 50 vacant positions because we're just a large organization, and that's an opportunity for you to work throughout the year where appropriate, to impact this working budget, like you say, throughout the year. So just some thoughts on that?
Sure, and again, for me, it's how you look at how we're saving money too. And you're right, there's a difference between vacancies and then, of course, budgeted positions. We did budget for those positions, and we didn't fill those positions, and so naturally, we were able to save some of those funds. And so that is a difference in that conversation. Just to give you a quick snapshot, in October of 16th of 2021, we had 24 assistant principals. As of today, we have 15 assistant principals. So one could argue that's not positions that we currently don't have anymore, whether it be from a vacancy conversation or a complete budgetary cut position. We were able to save over time. And so that's just, food for thought. One of the things that I could do a better job on is making sure that when I say, vacancies, I can be more deliberate as pertains to budgetary conversations versus actual eliminating the position altogether.
No, that's good. I thanks for the clarifying comments. Some of the questions that I'll have tonight, I think, are more so that it gets answered in the room. I think I know what most of the answers are, but I think that's something that somebody else might have that doesn't have the ability. They're not sitting in a chair here today with the ability to ask the question. So thank you for indulging me.
Thank you so much, Board Member Anderson. Does anybody else have any questions? Thank you, Mr. Chady.
All right, thank you. The next slide talks a little bit about the revenue limit authority and kind of walks through, conceptually at least, the calculation. The revenue limit was included in board docs. It's a rather complex spreadsheet for those of you that are really interested in digging into that. Feel free, but we'll try to summarize it here with this pictorial. So we start by taking our resident membership, that's 6,333 FTE. And again, the changes that were reflected in the preliminary budget are then in red and stricken below. So we had estimated 6,318. The reality was 6,333. We multiply that by the $11,000 per pupil within the revenue limit, and that gives us 69.6, almost $69.7 million. And again, that $11,000 value in the preliminary budget was $10,364.15. So thus the large swing there. We add in the declining enrollment hold harmless exemption, which is zero for us. We add in some one-time non-recurring exemptions, which equates up to just over $1.75 million. And then we add in the ongoing recurring exemptions, 2,263, and we end up with the net revenue limit of authority, $71,439,763, as compared to the $67.5 million that was the grand total as part of the preliminary budget. So the revenue limit increases just over $3.9 million. And again, it's important to point out that that increase is largely attributed to utilizing the full $11,000 value with the per pupil, that second step there. And again, that was all provided for through state statutes, through the biennial budget and prior legislation that became known to the district. So I'll pause there and ask if there's any questions before I jump to the next slide.
Is everybody good? Thank you, and thank you so much for including all of the detailed attachments on board docs. I think it's really very transparent. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. We'll talk a little bit about revenue limit membership here again. Revenue limit membership is a rather key factor within the revenue limit. So it's important to point out, and you can see the multi-year history here. And you look at 23, 24, very similar to what it was last year in the 22, 23 school year. Some people may look at this and see the significant drop from 2014, 15, where the district had 7,372 resident members. Beloit is not alone as the only district that's experiencing significant membership declines. We talked a little bit about this before. In fact, I would tell you that most districts reach their peak membership between the 2012-13 and the 2014-15 school years. And if you look at those three columns for the school district of Beloit, you'll see that 2014-15 was kind of our peak. But it doesn't really matter which district you look at. You can do the same graph with any district, and you're going to see their peaks in one of those 3 years generally. Certainly, there has been a decline through the years. The decline's obviously due to a number of different factors. Some of that could very well be open enrollment related with students departing the school district of Beloit for other educational opportunities with Beloit, Turner, Clinton, Parkview, Janesville, or elsewhere. But quite honestly, a lot of it is really due to a couple of factors, and I think Mr. Schneider mentioned one of those earlier. Some of the factors that I wrote down is just reduced birth rates. Beloit has had record low birth rates. I think what I saw, the 2022 was the lowest ever. So that will impact us going forward. Other things that factor in here is just smaller family structures and sizes. I'll use my own family on my father's side. I've got 7 aunts or uncles, so if siblings 8, my grandparents had 8, my parents had 4, I had 2. So, just family structures and sizes are getting smaller. And then along those lines, parents are just older when they're having kids. So, I look at my parents and they were in their late teens and early 20s, and I've got 2 children that are in their mid to late 20s, and they're not even thinking about kids yet. So, all of those things compound and factor into the number of students we have to educate. So that's just important to speak about that and talk about that in a larger global sense. The other thing, too, that you can look at here, and you'll see a noted significant membership decline post-pandemic, that 2021, a little bit of an uptick again in 21, 22. And again, that's not unlike any other district in the state that experiences that decline. Lots of reasoning for that, perhaps. Some of it may be seeking parochial school options or even homeschool options. But that's really kind of the question, not only within the state of Wisconsin, but nationally, is where did the kids go post-pandemic? So with that, I'll pause and see if there's any questions that need to be addressed there.
Thank you, Mr. Chady. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you.
We'll take another look at the revenue limit, the tax levy, and the general aid impact. So general state equalized aid being decreased by about $6.5 million. The equalization aid, keep in mind, really helps determine who pays, how much the state pays towards our revenues and expenses, and then more importantly, how much needs to be borne by the local property taxpayer. So again, we'll take a look at the total revenue limit authority, $71.4 million. We subtract out the state equalization aid value there, and then you end up with the revenue limit general fund tax levy. That general fund tax levy increased substantially from the preliminary budget. It was at just under 5.6 million as part of the preliminary budget, and now it'll sit at $9,126,308, so an increase of just over 3.5 million. And again, the large driving factor of that was the increase within the revenue limit, that low revenue ceiling from $10,364 and change to the full $11,000. So that's what's really driving the increase in the general fund, the property tax local portion. And again, I'll pause and see if there's any questions there.
Are we good, Go? Oh, it looks like.
I was
we're
going to
good.
say
Go
that
ahead.
the 3-year, the membership, the average, the last 3 people counts. I think it's very important to note that these past 2 years, going into next year will be the average, kind of how they will look at that. And so we'll lose that big year that we had, and one could argue in the 2021 school year, where we saw that big increase.
Right.
And so as we project certain conversations, just know that that average is going to look different for us next year, so we could possibly see less money when you look at our 3-year rolling average. Hopefully we'll stabilize and then, of course, start the uptick throughout the rest of this year. But I do want to make sure that we note that in this conversation today, so there won't be any major surprises if that come back like that next year. We kind of knew that that high year that we had will actually fall off the books, and then we'll start with another 3-year rolling average. It's calculated in the calculations this year,
Right.
so that one could argue that probably helped us a little bit, but now moving forward, that will fall off the books, and so that is something that administration is preparing ourselves for. Naturally, I'm already thinking about it, that's why I'm bringing it up now.
Another one of those factors that we need to consider for 24-25. Thank you. Next is a slide that speaks to the revenue sources for 23-24. And again, our primary operating funds are Fund 10, our general fund, and Fund 27, our special education fund. So we really kind of concentrate on those two. With this slide, though, we also provide the total and then a percent of budget here as well. I think it's really kind of important to start off by looking at the couple of the middle rows, the general state aid and the state sources. Those two combined, 70.7% of our revenues will be the result of funding through the state of Wisconsin to us through either state aid or some of our categorical aids and grants. And in addition, if you add in the following row 700, the federal sources, 89.19% of our revenues then comes from state or federal funds. And in fact, if you look back towards the top, the 211, the tax levy, and 200 other local, those two themselves combined for 9.31% coming from local sources. So again, 89% plus of our revenues come from state or federal funds. Just over 9.3% come from local funds. A few differences here between the preliminary and the original budget, other than some lower open enrollment revenue and really higher investment earnings. And again, the large changes with the tax levy driven by the fact that we can utilize that full $11,000 low revenue ceiling amount within the revenue limit. Again, I'll pause and see if there's any questions before we page on.
Does anybody have any questions? Because I would, of course, like to point out that I just want to clarify that it looks like we're getting, if I round a little bit, around just like $6.5 million from state and federal sources to cover the cost of special education. Is that correct? And we are paying 9.3 or about $9.4 million out of our fund balance, right, to cover the cost of special education, which is literally equitably educating all of the children that come to the school district of Beloit and following all of the state and federal mandates
Right.
about educating our children.
Yep.
Awesome, thank you.
You're correct. Good catch. Any other questions on revenue sources? A couple of pie charts that'll really kind of reflect the same. This pie chart looks strictly at the general fund revenues. Again, compared to the preliminary budget, the local share here increased from 6.08% to essentially 10% at 9.93%. And again, that increase was largely driven by the increase within the revenue limit, the authority provided via the state legislative changes over the summer. And then the state share actually went down at the preliminary budget level. That was at 74%, and that decreased to 71%, largely due to a slight reduction in general aid in that change from what was estimated previously. Continuing, we'll look at special education fund revenue by source here. Costs in special education fund are not covered by state or federal funds, require a general fund transfer to cover those expenses, and that transfer is reflected there in blue on a percentage basis. So compared to a preliminary budget presentation back in September, October's budget hearing, the state share reduced from 30.26% to 27.5%. Largely due to a reduction in special education aid from what was originally anticipated or estimated. And then that then increases the transfer from the general fund to help cover those expenses so that it essentially balances out.
Oh, Board President Levy, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question on the slide prior about the mention of the reduction in the state aid. Is that the reduction from, I think there are two categories where the district had been compensated, but the state budgeted different numbers. Is that what caused the reduction?
Yeah, that is in part one of it. So a large component there was a reduction in state equalization aid. But I think the other thing that you perhaps are alluding to is the high poverty aid that the district had received in prior years. The state has kept the high poverty aid category, but essentially did not fund it. So while they've got high poverty aid out there, they have a zero for a state allocation to it, and they instead redirected those dollars to state equalization aid and school levy tax credits.
So just in terms of some of the formulas and the tools that the state is using, there are categories that had dollars allocated to them before, but this time around, the categories remained, but $0 were allocated to them. So even though there was an increase in state funding, we still suffered a loss in state funding.
Yes, that would be correct. And if you bear with me a minute, I've got last year's revenue limit formula here. Let's see if I can identify the high poverty aid amount. And it's not jumping off the page, but I do believe it was like 330,000 or something of that nature that we had received in the 22-23 school year, but it essentially was zeroed out in 23-24. You're correct, Mr. Levy.
Right. I just wanted to, highlight that even as board members, 3 times now through a budget, you learn different things as you're going through. But I think that's to give proper perspective to people to understand that the numbers are not always coming back the same every year, year after year, and things that we have counted on that we've, had received money for, because that's our situation, come back with the category, but no dollars assigned to them. So again, like through our legislative action and leaning on that process to ask our elected officials to help us out, the category's still there. They could put some money in it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The only thing that's really known is the state biennial budget, that 2-year process. But even as the board or as the district was working on our preliminary 23-24 budget. The state biennial budget really wasn't finalized until late June, even into mid-July. A lot of our work is done well in advance of that. So, unfortunately, we're utilizing some estimates and assumptions, some best guesses, and what my colleagues feel is appropriate for us to use across the state, but it doesn't always hold true. So, such is the case there. We'll take a look at expenses by
so sorry.
object. I'm sorry, oops.
Just one quick question. Do you have any reason to believe that because the high poverty aid category still exists, even though it wasn't funded, that placeholder means that funding is possible in the future?
I would think that would lend to the possibility of that, and I use the word possibility carefully. I'm not sure that I would use probability, but possibility, yes. It's noted that the legislature did not intentionally eliminate it, though they did choose to redirect funding from it.
So if I'm inferring your tone correctly, you have no reason to believe that the funding will reoccur.
It is not likely that we would budget for that going forward in 24-25 because, one, we know it's not going to be there next year, the second year of the biennial. The 25-26 school year, again, we probably would not budget for it simply because it's rather small amount of money on a $100+ million budget. Do we get $250,000, $400,000 in it? Yes or no? I'd rather budget without it and then be surprised that we end up with $350,000 or whatever that we weren't expecting, than budget for $400,000 and then have to find where that money's going to come from.
Got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good question. Any others?
Oh, wait, does anybody else have anything? All right, thanks.
All right. Talk a little bit about expenses by object. So the expenses by object, this chart really reflects the what funds are being used for. So not necessarily the who or the why, but really the what. So if you look at it, salaries and benefits are reflected there. I add that up. Currently, it's about 58.6, almost 58.7% of the budget is in salaries and benefits. You'll note that little chart off to the right compared to the preliminary budget. This area increased by over $1.5 million, again, for compensation reserves, and that was the byproduct of boosting that to 4% as far as a allowance, so to speak, for 23-24 salary and wage increases. Coming down the rows, we'll talk, and you'll see purchase services, that 300 row level. That constitutes about 29%, just over 29% of the budget. Some of the things that entail in purchase services, just big picture category items here: transportation, utility costs, our contracted custodial, and then really other educational programming expenses that the district has to pay for voucher schools, independent charter schools, open enrollments, et cetera. And then the last item that I would include there, again, kind of big picture, is, again, that Beloit Memorial High School HVAC project. Over $2.5 million is budgeted in that row in particular for that ongoing and continued work. And then continuing down the page, really the next largest notable one is the fund transfers. The 800 row, $9.9 million, representing just over 8.7%. Those fund transfers are used, again, largely and primarily to offset Fund 27. So again, when our revenues within Fund 27, the Special Education Fund, don't equate the expenses, and they never do, we have to borrow or take money out of the General Operations Fund, move it to the Special Education Fund to make that program whole. So essentially, we're borrowing or stealing about $9 million worth of funding that could be available for all students and having to shift that over to help support the special education needs of those students in particular. There's also resources that are identified in the fund transfer to move or make a deposit into Fund 46, our capital improvement trust, and you'll see that on later slides, and then a minor transfer for Fund 99 or cooperative programming funds as well. So again, I'll take a pause there and ask if there's any questions.
Excuse me, just one. Does the 4% allowance for pay increases include all employee groups or just certain employee groups?
No, the 4% allowance is currently applied across the board to all employees for the 23-24 school year. Again, there's been no determination made, but I think it was wise for us to set money aside, so to speak, for compensation increases, and then allow the board the opportunity, one, to continue negotiations with the BEA to determine how much of those resources will be utilized, and then the distribution for the rest of the employee groups as well.
So just a question, and I'm asking you, but anyone who knows the answer, feel free to jump in. Since the BEA doesn't represent all groups, but allowances have been made for a 4% increase for everyone, what is the mechanism to determine how employee groups could be compensated outside of the purview of the BEA?
The mechanism, I'll start to answer that. The first part of it, just like with the first part, what we have to do is set our budget, is we have to negotiate with the BEA, which we are working on, which we have done in open session and closed session. We participated in different parts of determining what our opening position would be, and then even what other offers above what we initially stated could get to. And then with the other employee groups, where we're currently at is where we have determined to be as a board in terms of giving our administration numbers to use to budget. I think that if you think about like our compensation strategy as a board, if you go back to last year with the Evergreen study, the study of different roles and being compared to the districts around us. So those jobs were evaluated looking at similar duties and compensation in the local areas. We adopted that that tool because that had been a long cultural problem in our district about who's getting paid what and how they're getting paid. So as a board, we did adopt that compensation tool. The compensation tool does talk about a 2% row increase as we go down, and then also there's language as we adopted it that talks about how we look at percentages and how they're counted. And so as we have worked to figure out with our teachers where we can be, those are thoughts in mind about all of our groups that we have to compensate. So we have, like I said, everyone got put on that budget schedule, on that new compensation tool. And from that schedule, many people received an increase, some modest, some more. And then that was the process. And then trying to hold through with that philosophy of compensation is where we've been at in the meetings we've had over the last couple of weeks. That's how we've come to those positions.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, negotiations with the BEA are separate, and for everyone outside of the BEA, the potential for an increase could be that 2% row increase or step.
Well, it's up to what they budgeted for is the 4% across the board to all employee groups. That is what a majority of the board told them to budget for. And that's what our administration did, is what the board told them to do.
Yeah, if I can try to take a stab at Ms. Levy's question as well. Typically, I think school districts that have an organized bargaining unit or units plural typically start with those groups because they are the larger employee groups and try to reach agreement there. And then thereafter, they work on the other various groups and components. So recommendations will likely be forthcoming to the board after we have agreement with the BEA, would be my guess. Nothing that says that it has to be done in that fashion, but I think that's fairly typical of school districts with organized bargaining units.
Board Member Levy, are you good?
I am, thank you.
Sure thing. Anybody else have a question, thought, or comment?
I think both,
Well, I'm sorry, just another point though. I would add though, as we talk about that expense part, and it has been thought about by the full board as we have sat to decide and try to make decisions about compensation, that some people would say, you guys have no money, so how can you give anybody any money extra? But again, our thoughts have been to recognize the value of our employees, that we are in a difficult situation, but we don't want that to be borne on the back of the employees. And our thought is to do the best that we can for them and still come in with a balanced budget or a budget that has a surplus. So that's some of those thoughts. But like I said, there's always differing thoughts about how we could approach our situation. But we did want to, everything has gone up, and some people would say that the true cost of the labor is what CPI is. And, one of the things that we talk about in our strategic plan is predictability and stability in budgeting. Because as an educator myself, I don't like that we're not able, numbers and budget-wise, to be able to give people what they've asked for, which is what the state has said they're entitled to ask. So there's some differences there. Totally a valid point that if you have no money, how can you give people money? But things change, as we talked about in our compensation and budgeting, is that for us, as we went week by week, as we've had these different meetings, different numbers from the state have fallen to give us a favorable outcome that give us ability to do more. And also another historic problem in our district has been that different employee groups receive different amounts of increases at times that created dissatisfaction amongst different groups, and with some groups lagging behind others. So we just try to have a unified strategy to reward our employees through compensation, hopefully that we will retain employees in their service to our children.
I just want to add briefly, and I am certain that this was not your intention, Board President Levy, but I don't want us to frame a compensation discussion of if you don't support a raise because we don't have the money, that you somehow don't value our employees. And I think by saying we support it because we value our employees may give that impression. It is completely possible to value and honor the work of teachers, but also recognize that our fund balance is at less than 8%, and we would like for it ideally to be at 24%, 3 times greater than what it currently is. And you may come from a position of, I can't give you what I don't have, but it does not mean that I don't value and honor your work.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I agree with you. Does not mean that you don't value and honor people's work, or we don't. I'm just articulating some of the points as a board that we had decided on.
Thank you so much, Board President Levy. Board Member Levy, are you good? Anything else?
I am, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Anybody else?
So yeah, when we're thinking about compensation as well, one of the things that I mentioned in different conversations, that this is the ongoing conversation as the years turn, right? And so this is where we are now. We were able to, get some additional funds, as Mr. Chady has already mentioned. The 4% was built into the budget to make sure that we can cover what we stated what we're going to be able to cover for this year. Next year may be different, and the following year may be different. When you're thinking about CPI and where it is. And so I just want to make sure we add that to the conversation as well. Every year, the conversation comes up. And I think we're better at preparing ourselves for these conversations by having more conversations as such.
Thank you so much.
Continuing on, we'll look at the expenses by function next. And function really represents or reflects the purpose of the expense, how those monies are being utilized. So we'll start by taking a look at the top two rows, instruction and instructional support. If we add those two rows up, that's nearly 58% of the district budget is devoted towards frontline staff with teachers, aides, et cetera. Coming down, the rows will speak to facilities, transportation, business services. That's a rather significant percentage, 15.83%. And again, some examples there goes back to the contracted bus transportation services, custodial, utilities. Also included there would be capital maintenance or improvement projects. And again, I'll refer to the Beloit Memorial High School HVAC project that's underway. $2.5 million or so is reflected in there also. And then if we jump to the really the last three rows that are presented here on the chart, we've got instructional service payments. You can think of that as our open enrolled out tuition payments for those students that are seeking public education in another school system. The private school voucher is best exampled by the Rock County Christian School. And then the charter school payments, probably most notably our local, the Lincoln Academy, is reflected there. Again, those all constitute some rather sizable dollars. Over on the far right in red is the values that we anticipated, again, as part of that preliminary budget program that we introduced back in September. So while we had estimated about $9.5 million in expenses related to open enrolled out students, we currently anticipate that to be just over $9 million. For private school vouchers, we had estimated it to be over 1.7, and it came in, or is currently stands at just over 1.6. And then charter school payments, again, we had estimated at just nearly $6,150,000, and came in at under $6 million. So we did have a reduction of about $755,000 in expenses that we had anticipated for outgoing students. But again, with not experiencing that large outflux that we had anticipated, we were able to reduce expenses there. The last item I'll note about those three bottom rows in particular is that those are really very large, sizable expense areas. We have to estimate those because we don't know those values. And in fact, we don't receive the number of students that are exiting out until our October 15th final revenue limit worksheets released by the Department of Public Instruction. So, during the late spring and summer, we're trying to make our best guesses to estimates. And then we kind of wait until that mid-October date when we get the new revenue limit worksheet. And then it's like, aha, there it is. So then we got to try to make the adjustments accordingly at that point in time as well.
Thanks so much for clarifying, Mr. Chady. Board President Levy has his hand up.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
As you highlighted those three areas, there was an increase in the state budgeting for those areas.
There was while there was a reduction in the amount of students that we anticipated departing the school district of Beloit, there was an increase in all three areas of the amount per student that we have to fund or pay for. So it was kind of, there was a benefit, and then there were some additional costs incurred as well. Yes.
Right. So again, that's another space where our budget is differing because we had less students leave us, but the state allocated more money to those categories. So the students that already left us, it cost us more to pay for their education as it's being outsourced, as we're the local district paying more for them to receive services outside the district.
Yeah, that would be correct. I would point out that while the district did know of the increase in expenses for those three categories per student as part of the preliminary budget, so that portion was factored into our preliminary budget, the actual number of students utilizing those options was still an estimate and became known thereafter, and thus is updated here with the original budget tonight.
And just one question more, just to Dr. Garrison. Do we have the relationships with the people that are serving our children so that you're able to get the numbers or have better estimates? Because about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when the charter school came online, one of the things that was expressed to us was we didn't know that the money was going to come out this year.
So one of the things that I've been doing since I've been here is as I am having conversations with our community period. Across the street, well, at the Lincoln Academy, myself and the leadership there, Mrs. Cole, do have conversations as we are colleagues in this work. Naturally, we know that there's going to be students that do choose the option of Lincoln Academy. Unfortunately, this year, there's a lot of moving parts for all of us. All of us are trying to see where our numbers are going to be. We worked real hard to get our numbers where they are right now. I'm pretty sure that everybody on this street here is doing the same thing. And so as we work more closely, I'll be able to, have more detailed conversations around kind of where we're coming in at. I was able to have some conversations with the leadership there, Dr. Cole, over the summer, loosely thinking about possibilities of what it looks like from a waiting list conversation to even kind of where we are, naturally from a school district perspective. And so I will say that our work has been collaborative since I arrived. I can only speak for my leadership since I've been here. Naturally, we will continue to have those collaborative conversations. Just to let you know, and I want to make sure that I do note this, that I do believe the Lincoln Academy and their leadership was actually for that rule changing as well as pertains to the clause in our 2017 biennial budget. And so they were proponents of, of wanting that to change, to benefit all of our city as well. And so not to, belabor the thought, but that is my goal, to have more conversations with the community and to make sure that we are collaborative conversations are happening as we move forward. And not to go back to a previous slide, but I know that question was how much money we had from the high poverty aid. It was $341,146 to be exact. My numbers went back to find it.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you so much, Board Member Anderson.
Yeah, we consistently show these bottom three lines here as an expense. And just for transparency purposes, we have more than offsetting revenue for these because they're in our membership, correct?
They are in our membership, but it's not always more than the amount that we receive per member on a revenue basis. There are instances where the outgoing expense is more than what we bring in for the same individual.
Okay. And so let's say a child makes a decision and they leave our district and they go to one of these other options. And let's say they do that in third grade, which has been, or fifth grade, some of these key times that we've identified, which is part of why we said, reconfiguration is such a key, important thing. But once a student leaves, and then each year, let's say they leave and they're out for the next 7 years because they finish their education in one of these options, it's, one-off student leaving, we lose the difference between that. But if it's, because you can't adjust budgets for one student, right? But when we know we've got 462 students, or just to throw a number out there, you can budget for that, and it's still possible that financially we're still better off with the students in our membership and having them go somewhere else. I mean, so I just hate to see that it's shown as this expense, because if you had the same table of income by function and you had line items of students, the income we get for students that go to those options, choose those other options too, that it would be largely offsetting.
The one thing that I would add to that for context, and you threw out a number of 400 and something, those students are not concentrated in one space. Those students are spread out across our district and across grades. So it might be one student from a classroom. You're not going to save on electricity, on building costs, on educators, et cetera. So it's more difficult to absorb the gap that we're missing when students go somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, I always like to refer or use the example of, say you have 25 students exit a school district. They didn't all come out of the same class grade level in the same section. So it's, it's not as easy as saying, okay, we don't need that one teacher anymore. They all didn't ride the same bus route either, so, we still need to run all of those things, So, yeah, it does become a bit challenging.
Mr. Chady, thank you so much for that explanation. Board President Levy has his hand raised. Go ahead.
I think one of the other things, like one, I'm going to ask, you show it as an expense by function because that's how the state tells you to do it, right?
Correct.
Okay, and then secondly, so other understandings, because people have questions sometimes, is that, I'm just going to use the round number, 7,500 students, and right now we have 5,500 in the district. But those other 2,000 students that are not with us, the state sends the money to the school district of Beloit, and then the school district of Beloit purchases their education in those other places that they're going to. So the money does come to us, but then it goes back out because we have to pay for the appropriate number of students wherever they might be placed. Something like that?
Yeah, that's pretty close. It comes to us on paper. The state actually transits the aid to the various school districts and independent charter schools and voucher school programs as part of the mid-June final general equalization aid payment to the district. So again, we kind of get a big reconciliation worksheet. So, we record it as a revenue, we record it as an expense in our books, but to be very honest with you, the monies don't really flow through the Blackhawk Bank and then out of Blackhawk Bank, our local bank. The state just handles all of that. It's much more efficient for the state to administer those transfers or transits of funds than it is for school districts to do it. So yes and no is
Like
the
you
answer
said-
to your question.
Gotcha. So I'm good to know that we don't physically receive the money and then send it back out for them. But the yes part is they put it on the paper like we received the money.
Correct.
And then they send it out.
Yes.
And then the other thought is, so it's kind of somewhat of a symbiotic relationship because I don't know if there's no district, how do you fund those other spaces where those kids are going? So since we're all connected in that ecosystem, it's good to know that our partners are hopeful that things happen in budgetary action and state actions to help us in our funding because it helps them in their funding.
This kind of goes back to, the enrollment conversation a little bit as well. From just a babies being born in Beloit, let's just say there's between 400 and 450 babies or something like that. And of those 400 babies, when they get to, the age where they can come to school for K with us, we may get, let's just say 200 of them, or maybe even 3. But there's 100 or so babies that parents can choose to go to different spaces. And the reason why I bring that up is because, our goal and my goal will continuously be to make sure that our option is the best option, and that will allow families to stay with us throughout, their student's career. And so it is a bunch of moving parts with that. And I know I gave, credit to, not just the Lincoln Academy and the leadership there, really talking up getting that rule change, but that was really a state thing as well. Many people believe that conversation should change as it pertains to the revenue ceiling. But can you go back to that slide one real quick, Mr. Chady?
Yep, my bad.
No problem. But going back to this slide, you also hear the conversations around private schools and how money is being, moved around. There is some conversations that are happening at the state level where one could say that this could possibly not even be here anymore, meaning that they wouldn't send the money, put it on paper with us. It'll just stay on paper with them, so we won't have to worry about calculating that with us. Those are conversations that are also happening at the state level. Where that goes, I don't know. How far that will go, that's up to the lobbyists and everyone that, will push for that. The systems that we have in place now is that, this public schools is one of those hard and tried and true systems. And a lot of our families and a lot of people that live here went here. And I think the state and the surrounding country knows that the one thing that's probably going to be around is our public schools. And hopefully that'll be continuously supported as history, continues to unfold.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garrison. Board President Levy?
just a question for clarification. There were, is it 18 or 19, including us? How many districts are in our situation with that adverse 3-year ruling?
I think you're referring to, are you referring to the inability to utilize that 11,000 in the revenue limit?
I thought it
Yes.
was much more than that.
Yeah, there were 28 districts that were originally identified. Those, number of those districts were already above the $11,000 threshold. So I believe the final number ended up being, I believe it was 19.
19, okay. That's the number I was thinking.
Thank you so much. While we're on the subject, I just want to point out for clarity that this is so in addition to, thankfully, we did get the revenue increase, right, equitably along with the rest of the state.
Right.
Due to some magic. Okay, so yeah, just to put our budget into some perspective, and I had mentioned our special education funding earlier, the schools, so like the line that shows, here, let me jump back to the presentation because I'm looking at something else. The private school voucher payments, so the 1.5% of our budget that goes there, I just want to point out that the rule for them is they're allowed to get reimbursed up to 90% for special education. And I am a special educator. I love our special education students. Like, you know, these are the kids who need us the most. So I don't want to make this sound like a problem. I'm very proud that we transfer funds to educate the kids to you know what their needs are. But it's just, I just want to point out that funding in inequity and inequality, which is both, across the board, while we're spending almost $10 million out of our fund balance to just do our basic job as a school district, we're also paying money to voucher schools that are also allowed then to get up to a 90% reimbursement, which, you know, public schools in the state of Wisconsin were promised when revenue limits went into place in 1993, 2/3% reimbursement. So if we were, it really would be that pie chart that you showed us earlier, kind of flip-flopped, which would make a really large difference. And I just really appreciate the work that you and Dr. Garrison and this whole team is doing. And I'm so proud of the work that our school district does. And I just feel the need to point out this kind of Sisyphean task that we've been, you know, set with because of this ridiculous budget. So I just really appreciate your advocacy to the state, and I hope that we continue as a district to advocate to equitably fund public education to the students with the highest needs in Wisconsin. So thank you so much for that work, and thanks for entertaining my thoughts there. Does anybody else have any other questions before we go on? Thank you.
Okay, the next chart then shows the same expenditures by function, just again in a pie chart format or fashion. And again, looking at instruction, 42.9%, instructional support, 15.1%. 58% of our expenses are geared towards the classroom, student learning, frontline staff, so to speak. Again, coming around the chart, 15.8% in that facilities, transportation, business. Reminder, $2.5 million or so was tied up in that Beloit Memorial High School HVAC improvement project. And then again, looking at the very top, that charter school payment, private school voucher, instructional service payments represents nearly 16%, 15.9% of the budget, supports the costs to educate students, school district of Beloit residents, though being educated elsewhere. A few more slides to share with you. The first talks about our fund balance analysis. Some good news here, some not so good news, maybe a little bit of bad news here, but we'll talk a little bit about the good news first. If we first focus on that box in the lower right-hand corner where it speaks to the preliminary budget, as part of the preliminary budget, what the board approved back in September went to the budget hearing in October. That budget called for a deficit of just over $2.25 million. We are happy to report that we're in a balanced budget position here for the 23-24 school year. So that's the good news. Kind of the bad news is if you look at that percent of general fund expenses, and you can look at 22-23 at 9.93%, and then 23-24 at 9.88%, and you're thinking, well, if it's a balanced budget, why does the percentage goes down? The percentage goes down because the total expenses for the general fund increase. So that percentage or that difference between then our fund balance and the overall total expenses impacts the percentage, so it does slide marginally there. Any questions?
I have a quick question. If you could go back to that previous slide. So are you saying that our most recent calculation of the fund balance, could you, no, the one with the, yep.
This one.
Is 9.88, or are we at 7.9?
Let me answer that by saying that we have a fund balance of 9.9 at the end of the 22-23 school year.
Okay.
And we anticipate that that will drop marginally to 9.88 at the end of the 23-24 school year.
So right now, our fund balance is about 9.9% of our total budget.
Yes.
Okay, so, which is great. Well, no, it's not great. It is better than what I thought it was coming into this meeting. So the preliminary budget that we did pretty recently, how did we go from 7.9 to the about 9.9? Is that the differences in the calculations from DPI where we saw some increases there?
I think it was a combination of that and then the some changes in the deficit from the 22-23 school year. I think originally we were anticipating a slightly larger deficit, which would have then decreased the fund balance and altered the percentages as well. Yep. And again, you know, our board policy, I think, speaks to 14% as being the minimum. We're kind of a bit away from that at essentially 10%. You know, if I had to ballpark and guess as to how much more money would we need in our fund balance in order to hit that 14% minimum, it's probably in that $4.5 to $5 million. That's a value that you typically don't replenish on an annual basis. So that's likely something that we would strive to replenish over the course of a number of years, you know, perhaps being in a position of having $400,000 available at the end of a school year that we could put back into fund balance. So it will likely take a number of years to replenish that with the current strategy. Any other questions?
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chady. Board President Levy has his hand raised, and then if anybody else. Go ahead, Board President Levy.
I know this is toward the 23-24 budget, but as we're looking at this fund balance analysis, I do see where there was the borrowing because of the deficit budgets in the last 2 years. But looking at the 17-18 and the 18-19 school year, that those represent years where there was money taken from the fund balance also. So it's not something that just started in the last 3 years. We've had to take out of the fund balance before.
Yeah, that's a good observation. You know, typically when it comes to fund balance, you're either contributing to it or you're subtracting from it and utilizing it for various intents and purposes. The values of that, you know, change based upon the needs of those years or in some instances how you were able to save in those years as well. So fund balance is often referred to as a point-in-time value. So typically when we speak about fund balance, we think of June 30th at the end of the last operating or fiscal year. Fund balance is very much similar to our personal banking accounts, where they increase and decrease on a daily basis, depending upon how much money you receive when you receive it, and bills that you pay as well. So that's the same concept for the school district.
Right.
Mr. Chady,
Considering our closing of the 22-23 school year and the audited finish, where we started out at close to 10 million was the projected deficit, and like I said, through different actions that were taken, instead of experiencing 10 million, we only experienced $2,673,224. So some administrative action and board action were taken to not allow us to experience that full hit of that 10 million.
That's correct. And one of the things I want to just note that, as Mr. Chady mentioned, we have to do projections. Again, this is such a moving piece when it comes to budgets. And that's the one thing I do like about, when we're talking about money. My hopes is that as we continue to even work through this year, that I'm able to, make the necessary adjustments to bring back more surplus. Unfortunately, with the ESSER being what it is, it's hard to find $10 million worth of possible changes in our district. That's the way I like to kind of note it. So we will need some support. As the board has already mentioned, that we want to go to referendum. Operational referendum, moving into the next school year. I also want to note, though, that when we're thinking about our budget holistically, it is our goal to continue to meet the needs of our students. And so when you're thinking about a budget, we're still trying to meet the needs of our students. And I want to make sure I note that in this part of the conversation, because typically we get to this point, we start thinking, well, are there more cuts we can do? Are there more things we can take away? But my goal is, again, to meet the needs of our students, and so that we can continue to see the educational opportunities happen through over time for our school district. So that's a very important thing that the district administrator has to lead with right here at this point. I was like waiting to get to this point to say what I'm about to say right now. I get excited because I think our goal is to move us towards student achievement. That's our goal. But at some point, I always say you can't, cut your way to the top, but you also can't take away when our needs are continuously growing and growing and growing. And so those are the things that a budget actually has to offer. This conversation has to be a part of that conversation in this very moment. And so I just want to make sure I note that. We were able to do some great things over this past year. We were able to make certain things happen for our school district. But again, our goal is to make sure our budget can meet the needs of our students and educating them moving forward. So I just want to make sure I note that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garrison. Go ahead, Board President Levy.
Yeah, so Mr. Chady, also with our fund balance, last year we didn't have a need. We took the actions to be able to short-term borrow if needed, and we did not. And as we look at the budget this year, we'll have to still take those actions, but you anticipate that we will need to actually take out that line of credit.
Yeah, I was actually working on our cash flow borrowing paperwork today. We'll continue that probably tomorrow and this week. That'll likely come before the board here in November. School districts typically hit their low point of the year in mid-November and then in mid-June. Our forecast modeling tells us that we're going to get through the mid-November timeframe okay. However, the mid-June is questionable, so we'll still secure that line of credit and have that available for us as a just-in-case. I do want to come back real quick and just talk about the fund balance, in particular that 22-23 deficit, $2.6 million and change. Just to point out that that's still an unaudited number. The audit is still currently in process. Kerber Rose is working on that. I would not anticipate significant changes from that 2.6 value. It may go up or down marginally, but it shouldn't be significant. That audit is due to the DPI, I believe, December 1st, if I recall correctly. So within the next 4 weeks or so, that'll come to fruition and be known. Any other questions about fund balance?
Mr. Chady, you also noted in our conversation that...
I was going to say, I think this is my last. You got it, or me? It's kind of hard here. But my last one is just as we had already pointed out with our fund balance, even as we're coming in with balanced budgets or budgets showing surplus, that still does not replenish the fund balance.
Correct. So,
and we have talked with our Baird consultants and leaning with our administrators and already taking action that to meet our strategic goals of providing stability in our budgeting so that we can provide, as Dr. Garrison said, the best experiences and opportunities for our students, that we have to take actions where we're putting the choices in front of our community about how to fund the education for our children. And this is a conversation that will be ongoing and take multiple steps throughout the years to get us to our desired location versus where we are now.
Yeah, so the original budget before us this evening does not anticipate a significant surplus at the end of the year. So any increases to fund balance here at the end of the 23-24 school year based upon the current budget would be very marginal. So the district, of course, will do everything that we can to monitor expenses throughout the year with hopes that we would have some budgeted expenses that were not utilized that perhaps then we can shift over to fund balance and use as an opportunity to replenish.
Board President Levy?
And I just had to ask this last part because this is a part of the budget presentation that I want to make sure we've got understanding. So even as we're closing into the 23-24 budget, as we look to the 24-25 year, the expected deficit from the modeling and things that you see, it does exceed what we have in our fund balance.
It does indeed.
So, okay, so to me, the important point to our community is on last year, we put information in front of you so that you could make an informed decision. On this year, we're going to have to put information in front of you so you can make an informed decision in April. And so some people would say that last year in April, people had the opportunity to say no. And then this coming April, people may have the opportunity to say no. But when we get to November, if it takes November, we're going to be looking in a different situation if we know that our projected deficits in the years to come will exceed our fund balance.
That's correct. I think, Board President Levy, one of the things that I try to, work with is, again, throughout the year, we'll have conversations around the budget and kind of where we are. And naturally, our goal is to have some form of increase or surplus at the end of the year to talk about. I do want to note, though, at this very moment, Mr. Chady, we had a conversation when we was looking at the data that we were able to gather, that over the past 20 years, how many balanced budgets were we able to pass or so?
Oh, now you're going to put me on the spot, Dr. Garrison. I think it was like only 4 over the past 20 years actually had a balanced budget that was presented at the time of the budget hearing.
Correct. So both of us had the same number. This is our fourth.
Say that again, Dr. Garrison.
This is our fourth balanced budget at this point of a school year over the past 20 years or so. And that's a very important thing to note in this conversation, that this board helped get us to that point. And naturally, no one does it by themselves. And so I don't want to make it seem like that I did it by myself as well. You all worked with me to get us to this point. Now, naturally, it is our goal to continue to have these conversations. But I also want to note that thought in this conversation today. And so again, I had to wait to get to this point to say what I need to say right now. So thank you.
I feel like a total Debbie Downer, but I will be brief. Just like we went from a larger expected deficit last year to coming in better than expected, it is possible to have a balanced budget at this point and at the end of the year have a deficit.
That is correct.
Not that
Because
that's what we
don't know-
expect or are working towards, but I just want people to understand this is a snapshot, and the intention and the work is always to come in better than what the snapshot is.
Right. We don't know what natural events will come, what things will happen that we can plan or not plan for. And one of the other things is that we do know that as budgets were presented to this board and other boards in the past, based on some of the administrative practices, we were not in the standard budget cycle that most districts in the state of Wisconsin have been using. When we look at that budget manual that is given as a guide, we were actually in our district doing something different that I like to say is you see the deer in the middle of the road and you're not able to make adjustments. You're just going to hit that deer with your vehicle. I am thankful for our administrators and the work that they have done to help us as a board to see something coming down the road and be able to make adjustments so that we can provide the best and opportunities for our students with the resources that we have.
Thank you so much, Board President Levy. I overlooked Board Member Johnson. Go ahead, please.
That's okay. It's because I'm way down here in the boondocks. So I have a comment and kind of a question. And this is a comment that has come up in the past. And Dr. Garrison pointed out to us at our last meeting that since the third Friday count in September to the last meeting, our numbers had actually increased 142 students, which is awesome, and I think that's wonderful. I love Beloit schools, and that's, great, really wonderful. However, there's a misconception that people seem to have that with Wisconsin and school funding, that the dollars should just follow the student. And that's true to some point, but people are constantly moving. For instance, over a course of 2 or 3 weeks, 142 students came, 46? Okay, came to our school district that we're not receiving funding for until we get to count them on the state records, which would be next January, the 3rd January count. So 146 students, 146,
Just 46 students.
46. Oh, okay, 46. I'm sorry, I thought you said 146. But anyway, that's $11,000 times 46 students that are coming to our district that we're not getting funding for. So we still are accountable, and we're still going to give them the best possible education we can, but our class sizes go up. So these are real things that happen, and I don't know how to make this better and more equitable for these students coming in and for the teachers whose classrooms are increasing. What do you suggest we do for situations like this when students return to our district?
Well, that's a full question. Naturally, we got to look at where those students are going when they are entering our district. We do some balancing as we get new students as much as we possibly can, but we do have a teacher shortage. We do have a special education teacher shortage as well. There's a lot of different needs that kids come with, and so it is our goal to do some balancing as the students are coming. But realistically, if 100 more come, we have to service, that 100 the best way we know how. And so I don't have a perfect answer for that. Again, there is some balancing that does come into the conversation when we are getting these students, like what classes they go into based off of the numbers.
Do you know, or has anyone done a year-over-year analysis of, okay, based off of our third Friday count versus our mid-November count or our internal counts that we may be doing, how year over year, how many students are coming post third Friday? And from which districts, from which areas? And that's not something I expect anyone to have the answers to now, but going forward, I'd be curious to see that on a board agenda or even a committee. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll comment on that. So the second Friday in January count process, the DPI requires us to do a reconciliation between the third Friday and the second Friday of January. So that reconciliation requires us to identify any new students that are coming into the district between those points in time, and then also to identify any students that had departed between those points in time. The amount of transition between the third Friday in September and the second Friday in January is just quite honestly unbelievable, no matter which district you're in. It's just a matter of size and scale. But there's significant transitions that occur between those 2 points in time. I don't believe that we have access to the where to or where from. So I don't know that we can identify, what school district they were coming to per se, perhaps so. And we might have data regarding the departures because we would be sending student records. Of course, we'd get student records too, but yeah.
It'll come from the student record division, but Mrs. T, you bring up a good question. That's something that we can look into.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Board Member. Did anybody else have anything? We're good? Yeah, so in addition to the ancillary costs that you're losing, like the expenditure, so like when a couple of students leave, there's still the ancillary cost for the rest of the class, even though 2 students might equal like the cost of 1 teacher in a classroom or something like that. You're also absorbing then the cost of those students that weren't funded and aren't funded until the following year. So it gets to be, yeah.
Are those when we had this 46 headcount change, are those funds when we eventually do receive them, are they prorated?
Yeah, so keep in mind, within the revenue limit, while we may receive 46, and I'll just round it down to 45 to make life easy, it's a 3-year rolling average, right? So you essentially receive a third of the funding for students. So if you're receiving 45, you're actually getting full funding for 15. So, that does play into both revenue limit and the equalization aid. And with regards to open enrollment in particular, the state tracks open enrollment by the day for students. So if a student spends 10 days in your district, you get that proration of the open enrollment revenue. Likewise, it would be an expense going out as well, again, because of the amount of transition that they actually compute it by day.
Thank you so much. Did anybody else have any other questions before we move on? All right, thank you so much.
Next slide is the tax levy impact. There's a lot of good with this slide. Now, I mean, it doesn't really portray a lot of information, but I'm going to touch on some things and identify some highlights for you as well. So when we look at the 23-24, our all funds levy, $10,740,107. The board will be asked to adopt that on the next action item here later this evening. That includes the amount necessary for Fund 10, our General Operations Fund, for Fund 38, our non-referendum approved debt fund, and Fund 80, our Community Service Fund. That equates out to a mill rate of $3.96. I'll take a pause right there, though, because those of you that may recall, in the preliminary budget, the mill rate was $2.45. So to go from $2.45 to almost $4 is pretty steep, almost a $1.55 increase, and you're sitting there wondering, hey, what's going on with that? Keep in mind that the reason for that is, again, because we had that availability of the full $11,000 low revenue ceiling adjustment within the revenue limit. So that then increases the property tax levy by essentially $4 million. That translates out to about that $1.50 increase in the mill rate. Bottom line is that not only is the total tax levy in the mill rate less than it was in the 22-23 school year, but more importantly, I took a look at some data on the Department of Public Instruction this afternoon. The tax levy and the mill rate are the lowest they've ever been for the school district of Beloit, looking back 31 years.
Thank you so much for that data. Board President Levy?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about that. I know, like we talked about in that 21-22 school year, the drop that was coming as we went to 4.77. And some of our action around our referendum last year was towards keeping it the same as we were trying to estimate our costs and project out and take the actions that we could take before the state had rendered what they were going to put in the budget. And at that time, there were community members who theorized that if you don't vote for the referendum, it'll be zero. That was kind of explained that it's not going to be zero. And as you said, we had a preliminary budget that estimated around 2, but the increase in our ability from the state, which has helped us to result in a favorable budget that has some surplus, that means that we are closer to that 477. So when tax property bills come out for that year, it'll be closer to what people are paying now, steadier than another significant drop, because the drop from last year to this year was 54% in our portion paid to our school district.
I'm sorry if I missed a question there.
No, just kind of an explanation so that as, 477 this year, 396, and the next year it's closer, but we're still working with less dollars as a result. Even though the state has increased it from the 2, the 396 is closer than the 477. But, like I said, we were another part of our aim and our budget as we're working towards is that drop from 1010 to 477. When I say hitting the deer and not being able to do anything, that's a result of dropping from 1010 to 477.
Yeah,
You got to be able to take some proactive actions.
Yeah, when I look at this, I think there's lots of good when we look at the 23-24 being the lowest. Of course, the contrary side of that is, as we prepare for an operating referendum question here in 24, they're going to go up, right? So, the hill's going to be a little bit steeper. It's going to be a harder climb as we explain that to the electors. As much as I look at this chart and I think favorably, I also look at that change from 21-22 to 22-23, and I can't help but think that there was a missed opportunity there by the school district, likely because of the instability that was occurring within the business office and perhaps the superintendent's office as well. It would have been nice to be able to, have a decrease, but not have it fall as substantially as it did, because just as much as it's fallen the last few years, now with an operating referendum before us in 24, we'll see market increases both in the tax levy itself and then in the mill rate once we know those values and what we're seeking to ask the voters to approve.
Thank you so
Right,
much.
that's the positioning and leadership that I'm speaking to, of having people in the respective chairs to do the work that they do, because when your taxes go from 1010 to 477, 54%, and then they drop lower, whenever you get ready to ask for anything else, you're raising taxes back up. So that's some of the instability that we did not want taxpayers to see in terms of, that yo-yo effect and what's happening with in their own personal finances.
I think it's important to note that, and thank you, Mr. Chady, for explaining the slide. I think it's important to note, our goal is to keep things as we didn't want to, I don't think naturally anyone probably want to see a 1010 to 477. However, now we're at 396 based off of the things that based off of our conversation right now. The state average is 770. We use that number as a number a lot of times. As a state average. As a school district, we are, now in the bottom 5 as it pertains to districts with tax levies, less than, $4. And so, however, when you couple that conversation with the size of our district, we could be number 1 based off of the size of our district. This is a city that we live in, right? This is a city. This is not a, township, or this is not a, village, or, even a municipality from that perspective. We are a city with, thousands of people that operate here. And so one could argue we could be in that, that number 1, number 2 range based off of our size. With the request that will be coming to the public, and this is the perfect time just to say this, there will be a natural increase to that conversation. No one is trying to hide that thought. There is monies that we have to request to continue to have our operational conversation, or things could look much different, moving forward. And then it's our goal to service our students at the highest level and giving them everything they possibly need to be successful. And so I just want to make sure I note, that part of the conversation, where that number will be. There's a threshold that we'll look at, and we'll bring that information forward when at the appropriate time. But right now, it is at 396, well, that's the number that we're looking at now for the board to consider. And so I just want to make sure I note that part of the conversation as well, that the state average is 770. And around us is much greater than this number with less students.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garrison. Board President Levy, I just wanted to kind of add to the conversation that you brought up 2 points. First of all, this biennial budget that was just passed at the state level is the 16th consecutive year of defunding relative to inflation. So I want to sit with that for just a second. So like for the last 16 years, no school district in Wisconsin has been funded equitably relative to inflation. Furthermore, if you use that 31-year number that you just provided, Mr. Chady, according to the internet, hopefully, I'm hoping this is correct. This is based on government CPI data. The cumulative rate of inflation for the last 31 years is like 119.4%. So it's like if you think about what even that $3.96 mill rate would have meant in like 1992, you know what I'm saying? It would be, the value is different, right? And so there's just like these layers of loss of value due to inflation and sort of like the systematic defunding that's occurred at the state level that we're having to deal with now. And I appreciate you taking the time to kind of illustrate that, because that's some understanding that I think we have to build as a community, that just like in our personal lives, I know our household is dealing with increased costs, and it's my grocery bill is terrifying. And I know we're all kind of in that situation, and it's like the school district is trying to take care of my kids eat our school lunch every day, right? And I certainly appreciate that that's so there's all this value added, right, to each of our individual households because of the school district. And so all those things considered, I appreciate you putting it into that context. So thank you for that. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions? Oh, go ahead, please, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. And I know I've pointed this out before, Mr. Chady, but again, so in 2018, 2019, for a $100,000 home, we're looking at $1,173 versus this year, $396. So that's a difference of $777 for a $100,000 home. Now, granted, if you had a $100,000 home in 2018, hopefully the value has gone up. But tax-wise, people have been getting tax reductions year after year after year, and we're expected to adequately fund high-quality education. The reason I bring this up is because so many times out in the public, people will say, well, I rent, therefore I don't pay taxes, I don't care what's happening, go ahead and raise or lower, it doesn't affect me. And that is such a fallacy, because you pay rent, your taxes, the landlord has already assumed the value, the cost of those taxes in that rent. And also based on what I've heard, rents haven't been going down the past 5 or 6 years here in Beloit or anywhere,
Right.
even though the cost of the taxes have been going down. Thank
So
you.
are you saying that when the taxes went down by 54%, the school district portion, the rents didn't go down 54%?
Yeah, you got that right.
Or any? I don't know. Okay, you're right. I understand.
No, I just want to again make this point that we are one part of a big system here in our community, and being
Right.
aware of what's happening at the
but
city
like you
level
said-
as well. We all have to pay for our housing, and I want people to really be aware that when we come to them in April and say, we are asking for a referendum to help us pay for this education for our students, for all of Beloit, people are going to push back and say, well, our taxes are going to go up. Yes, but they have been going down.
You're right. I would add to that, like you said, that even Mr. Chady and Dr. Garrison, as you help our citizens understand their tax bill, the portion that the school district adds to it versus the other parts of it, how it's made. But like I said, from last year, when we went from 1010 to 477, the school district portion went down by 54%. So like you said, helping people to understand that difference will be very important to properly educating our citizenry on what is actually happening with our school finances.
If we continue on, we'll take a look at the other funds. Again, there's very little change that occurred here, but I'll take the opportunity just to kind of highlight what each of these funds are so that the board and the public have some familiarity with them. So the top row, Special Project Fund 21, you can essentially think of that as our student activity accounts. It could be anywhere from a class of 2024 to a girls volleyball account to student council, those types of account activity transpire in there. Typically rather flat revenues and expenses. We've kind of got that budgeted accordingly. Debt Service Fund, Fund 38 is our non-referendum approved debt. So we have that, and we've got those expenses that we have to pay, the revenues that we collect through the tax levy as well. Fund 39 is our referendum approved debt. You can see that we do anticipate expenses of $3.4 million, retirement of some principal there. I will point out that there is the possibility or the potential for the district to call some of the additional borrowing notes that are there, essentially to prepay a portion or perhaps even all of the that remaining debt. Those funds were collected last year. Though we've not yet fully finalized the repayment plan. There's kind of some strategy behind that, so we're working with Baird Public Finance to ascertain when is the best time of the year to actually do that prepayment, to call those notes, and if it's advantageous for Beloit to do that in its entirety and to prepay all of it here in the 23-24 school year, or do a portion of it this year and then a portion of it again in the 24-25 school year. Our Capital Projects Fund, Fund 46, we do have a transfer, an interfund transfer from Fund 10 budgeted to the tune of $550,000, again, in an effort to make investments into our Capital Improvement Trust Fund. Those resources can only then be used for future capital maintenance project purposes. Think roofs would be one example, parking lot improvements, blacktop, playground improvements along those lines as well, et cetera. Our Fund 50, Food Service Fund, accounts for the activities associated with feeding students. Again, relatively in and out, $4.9 million anticipated in revenues, $5.8 million in expenses. Yes, expenses are higher than the revenues, but the Fund 50 program does currently have a balance of over $1.8 million, and the DPI is asking us to spend some of that down, so we're trying to utilize and consume some of that. Fund 73 is our other post-employment benefit trust fund. Important to note that there is one remaining participant that's eligible for benefits through the post-employment benefit trust provided by the School District of Beloit. So we've anticipated expenses of around $41,500. We anticipate that that fund will close the end of next school year with around $3.9 million. When that last participant is out of the program, then that 3.9 will revert back to the school district. We do take a little bit of a penalty on that within the revenue limit, but most importantly, we'll have around $4 million, 3.8, 3.9, $4 million coming back to the school district in the 24-25 school year. And then finally, not quite finally, two remaining. One, the Community Service Fund, Fund 80. Within the Community Service Fund, there's been some missed opportunities through the years. So we're going to be transitioning some of our expenses that have previously been paid through Fund 10, our General Operations Fund, to Fund 80, our Community Service Fund. Some examples of that has been that the school district has contributed a financial amount to the Beloit Public Library, their Blender Cafe, for the past couple of years. I believe we're in year 2 of a 3-year commitment to them currently. So again, that expenditure in prior years could have, perhaps even should have been coded to Fund 80. The Community Service Fund was not, so we'll be moving that that way accordingly. Likewise, the Even Start programming that was formerly at Brother Dutton, the rental expenses there were paid out of the General Operations Fund, could have, should have been paid out of the Community Service Fund. So we'll be shifting expenses from Fund 10 to free up resources for our internal purposes to Fund 80. And then likewise, with the Even Start programming, we've also will have additional ancillary support there from custodial to utilities, and even some capital improvement projects within that portion of the building that we'll be able to charge to Fund 80 as well. Beloit Civic Theater has utilized the small theater at Beloit Memorial High School for a number of years, and again, an ungrabbed opportunity where the district has handled all of those custodial expenses, utilities under our general operations fund. And again, we can shift those expenses to the community service fund and free up resources for our students and staff internally. And then likewise, we are also going to be levying some money for the potential redevelopment of McNeil or Wright School as community center. So any efforts that we would have to expand or to utilize those facilities here going forward, we would have some resources available to help pay for any capital improvement projects. I'll just use McNeil as an example. There's some facade issues on the exterior of that building. There's also some roofing issues. You know, we wouldn't be making those improvements if those buildings weren't going to be used. But if they are going to be used for some type of community center type programming opportunity, it would be important for the district to maintain our building envelope, fix what needs to be fixed on the outside of the building and the roofing as well. So we'll have some resources available to help facilitate some of that project if they come to fruition. Any questions? Mr. Levy, I see a hand.
Go ahead, Board President Levy.
The first question I had, as you mentioned about, I think it was the fund, the debt service.
Yep.
Is that process of defeasance that we had been involved in?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if there was a defeasance there last year or not. So in the 22-23 school year, a levy, a higher than normal levy was implemented to basically collect sufficient funds to pay off the remainder of our Fund 39 debt. So we've got the resources on hand to do that. You would think that you'd want to rush out and do that and make that payment and make that debt go away, but there is some strategy involved in doing that as far as the timing and how much of that payment we would make in the 23-24 school year, and then also perhaps in the 24-25 school year. So we're still working with our broker or financial consultant, Robert W. Baird, as to the strategy that we want to employ there. In lots of, probably the biggest weight or pause, so to speak, is the success or lack thereof of the April 24 operating referendum will play a key role into when, if, and how much we actually prepay. So just to kind of set that stage, that decision may not be forthcoming until after that April election date.
Right, and then a question about when we pay this, where do these funds come from? Do they come out of the fund balance? Where are we paying this from?
They do come out of fund balance, but not out of the general fund balance, not out of that 10% value that we looked at previously. There is a separate fund balance that's attributed to Fund 39, our referendum-approved fund, debt fund. So those funds are there. They are in an interest-bearing account, so they're generating interest. That's fairly marketable with what else is out there for us. I'm comfortable with that. So yeah, the question will be the when, and again, that decision will likely come after that April referendum question.
Right, because that is a question that I had received from some about, if some, just, and work me through and give me the proper school finance explanation that, you have debt and you have time. And sometimes if you pay your debts off early, you're not in debt, but you don't have any money. So when we look at accelerating those payments, like you said about timing, and then also the need to have some debt in our formula for how we're funded by the state.
Yeah, so probably the biggest implication is that the timing of the debt payments can impact how much equalization aid the district receives in the future. So, we have to be somewhat strategic about when we make those payments so that we don't negatively hurt the district more so than necessary.
And then my last question is about that OPEB. I know that I remember there were 3 employees and now there's 1. And like you said, just kind of the use of that money after, as you said, there's a hit that we would take, but that's close to $4 million that is coming back to the district.
Right, yeah, so that would be about $4 million that we would anticipate returning to the general fund, Fund 10, probably in the 24-25 school year, likely about mid-year, to be honest with you. That comes back in as a deductible receipt, and again, we're kind of getting into some of the lingo of the business. So it does it will have some modest negative impacts to the district, but more importantly, we'll have $4 million or so returning to the general fund. How and where those monies are utilized is yet to be determined. I mean, we could choose to utilize a portion of those funds to offset just general operation needs. The board could say we want to use a portion of those funds to go to fund capital improvement projects by moving it to Fund 46. Or the board can say, no, we want all or a portion of it to go straight to fund balance and to help close that gap to get us towards the 14% threshold as well. So all future considerations.
Are you good, Board President Levy?
Money in the couch. Good.
Perfect, thanks. Anybody else have any questions before we move on? Good. All right, thanks.
All right, just a couple of final slides. Again, some considerations. We spoke quite a bit about the fund balance policy. Board policy says 14 and 25%, kind of 14 being that nadir, the threshold. We're significantly below that objective currently. Again, if I had to estimate, I would say probably another $4.5 to $5 million would get us at that 14% benchmark. While this tonight is about adopting the original budget, to be honest with you, between now and the end of June, there will continue to be some budgetary changes that are necessary. Best examples are, one, we're not quite sure yet where we're going to be with staff salary and wage increases for the 23-24 school year. While we've budgeted 4%, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where it's going to end up, of course. The board will have to make those determinations. And as best we can, budgets are essentially a plan. And as you go through the school year, sometimes plans change. So sometimes new needs become identified. Sometimes an anticipated expense comes in higher than previously. So there will very likely be opportunities throughout the year where I'll be coming back before the board asking for a budget revision. And we'll walk through that step as we go. But just to kind of let you know that this doesn't really lock us in for everything between now and the end of June. There will still be some changes along the way. The last thing to point out is that apparently last year, the budget did not have state and federal grant estimates included therein. This year, we've got those booked accordingly. So we've got that all taken care of. And a last final comment again, this year we're using almost $12 million of ESSER funding to support the budget and balance some of our expenses with our revenues. And that's really just going to present a pretty significant fiscal cliff. Even if we factor out the $2.5 million for Beloit Memorial High School, that puts us at about $9.5 million. If you figure a 3% increase, just CPI type increase, Now we're probably up towards that $10+ million deficit for 24, 25. So, earlier tonight, we were talking a little bit about the Lincoln Academy in particular and the number of students there. And I mean, literally 6 hours ago, I was at my desk doing a projection for 24, 25 for Lincoln Academy. So, I mean, we're already starting to work on some portions of 24, 25 budget. So, lastly, the budget publication, available here at the district office, and actually, for the most part, all attached via board docs, both for the public and the board's consumption. So hopefully you've all had the opportunity to review that. A slide for questions, and I think we got through a lot, but I'll pause and see if there's others.
Thank you. I'll just jump in briefly and just want to be very public about the thanks for you and for Dr. Garrison and for the team that put all this information together. Also, thank you for the context. If I heard you correctly or understood your comments correctly, that what we are being asked to approve tonight is a financial framework for our district. And at certain points between now and this time next year, we're going to be asked to make specific financial decisions that are in line with this framework, but that this is fluid. This is a living, breathing document.
Well said.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Board Member Levy. Would other board members like to ask questions or offer comments? Please go ahead.
I have no questions. Just, again, I want to really thank you and Dr. Garrison and the whole team for all of their work on this budget. When we look at what's happened in the last 2 years financially in this district, to work so hard to bring us to a balanced budget and to keep us on track as to where we're going has been, I know it's taken a lot of work and a lot of effort to do that, and I greatly thank you and appreciate your effort to not just the board, but to the school district and to this whole community for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Schneider. Board President Levy?
Just again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Garrison, to Mr. Duff, to Mr. Chady, to all that have been involved in helping us to reach our goals that we laid out in our strategic plan, to create some stability and predictability in our use of resources, as Dr. Garrison said, so we can provide the best experiences and the best outcomes possible for our students with the resources that we have. Finance, there will be a challenge. And like I said, even when you get elected to school board and you know some things, you're still working in a coordinated effort with 6 other people to achieve things. What is the will of the board? And we're very thankful. I'm very thankful as a board member for the people that I have served with and the people I do serve with, and for the administrators, because you can clearly see the difference that administrative leadership makes if you have someone dedicated to thinking about what the job is from that role, and allows board members to do our job and work together. But when you don't have people operating in that role, it's very difficult. As Dr. Garrison came in as a superintendent with nobody in the business office, one of the first things we talked about was, you might want to get a business director. That position sat vacant for over a year. And even as a board member, there's a part where the administrator is doing some work, but you have to say, hey, can we get somebody? So I am definitely thankful to Dr. Garrison and his leadership, because before he had a full staffing of people in that space, there were additional works that he had to do to keep the ball moving. So thankful for that leadership, because it has been a service to our community and our district.
Thank you so much, Board President Levy. Does anybody else have any thoughts, questions, or comments? I feel like I'm missing like an invitation to wrap up the meeting, but I did have a couple things, but I'll be very, very brief. In the spirit of Board Member Anderson had mentioned earlier, like he asked some really good questions just for the sake of putting them into the conversation in case other people have questions. I did, in the spirit of transparency, ask some questions of our administrators. I'm not going to I had like 7, so I'm going to just summarize what I asked and what I received. And I think that some of these discussions are more appropriate to as we get into discussing like when we form the referendum question and talking about like what is like the cost benefit like and what are the opportunity costs, right, to the community and to the district. So to be brief, I had asked about at what point we consider as we look at our budget the impact on facilities or potentially closing buildings. When we made the decision to restructure the buildings like last spring, we talked about the possibility of, for example, going down to one middle school. And given that enrollment was very steady, which I don't think anybody was really anticipating at that time, Dr. Garrison's response to my question when I asked that was that like we're not in a space where we need to do that in this moment, which is good, I think. There's also some questions that I had asked about the possibility of partnering with the city, potentially having conversations about transportation and things of that nature. So I just want to put those topics out there without getting into the weeds on the answers, because I just want to let our public know that these are things that our administration is actively working on, things that your board is considering. And I think that we're going to continue some of those conversations as we get more into that referendum question discussion. But I just didn't, you put such great effort into answering my questions. I just wanted to bring those up. And I just think that those are important topics to highlight. So I'll just echo everybody else's sentiments of deep gratitude to all parties involved for the presentation this evening, all the work that went into it. And to Board Member Levy's point, given that it is a fluid sort of framework, all the work that's going to continue to go into it. So with that, does anybody have anything else? Because I know we have one more topic to get into here. So everybody's good? Okay. So let me jump back to the agenda quick. Okay, so the next action then would be, is there a motion then to move approval of the original, the presented budget? Is that? Okay, so would anybody like to move approval of the 2023-2024 budget?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Schneider and a second by Board Member Levy. Any discussion? Okay, do we need a roll call at all, or are we good with just regular vote?
I'd like a roll call, please.
Just kidding. We're going to do a roll call vote. Sounds great. Thank you, Ms. Shope. Does anybody have any other discussion before we vote? All right. Thank you, Ms. Shope, for the roll call.
Okay. Craig Schneider,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Aye.
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Brian Nichols,
Aye.
Tia Johnson,
Aye.
Sean Levy,
Aye.
and Megan Miller.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shope, and thank you, everybody. That takes us to our next topic, which is item 2B, the 2023-2024 tax levy approval.
And
Yeah.
I'm gonna be quick. Just like last time, naturally, these are the conversations that we have to have once you approve the budget. Naturally, you roll right into the tax levy conversation. Mr. Chady will, give you a high-level overview of kind of where we are with the tax levy. And naturally, you've heard a lot of what went into the conversation, naturally. And so we don't have to repeat everything in that previous conversation. I thank the board for allowing me to, serve in this capacity. I don't do a good job with like thanks and that type of thing because I don't do it by myself. I do it with a team of people. Naturally, there's a vision that I have to bring forth and try to move forward. It's a lot. It's a lot that goes into this work on a daily basis. And again, it is part of my vision to make sure that the school district of Beloit is at a fiscal stable position for years to come. That's a very important piece for me right now. And accomplishing that will take all of us, not just the 7 in this room, right? But the entire community getting behind the idea that this is an all of us conversation And in the midst of where it's easy to say, no, that's them, and that's their conversation, we need to figure out how all of us can continue to have this conversation around putting the breadcrumbs in front so we can have something to follow moving forward. Being financially and fiscally responsible is what high-achieving school districts do. And we want to continue to become that conversation. We have a lot of great things that are happening here, and it is my responsibility to make sure that we hear about those things, but also hear about the challenges that we also face. And so I'm not going to sprinkle one without the other. Naturally, there is a time for us to celebrate where we are, and you're going to hear a lot of that in the next coming month. But there's also going to be a time for us to sit back and say, oh, here's the challenges that we need to face head on and address those things for the school district board can be well prepared moving forward. As I work with other superintendents and I share this same sentiment, it is our responsibility as district leaders or as the district administrator to make sure people understand those two conversations very clearly. And if at any point the board and or the public believe I'm not being clear with that conversation, please let me know, because that is part of my responsibility to be clear and that there's clarity built around serving all of our students. And so as I work with other administrators and we have this conversation together, in absence of that, you have dysfunction. And one person doesn't trust the other, and the other person doesn't trust the other, and then the community don't trust you, and then the city doesn't trust you, and then it's all this dysfunction happening. And so one of the things that I have done since I've been here has been very clear around where our money is. And hopefully that trust has been built over time, and it'll continue to be built over time. But to go from $10 million to, one could argue when it's all said and done, probably close to that $1 million deficit is a lot of work. And a whole lot of time has been put into this conversation. Even though we didn't pass our referenda, which I still have, thoughts about that, collectively, we've come a long way. We have come a very long way. And really, since we've been together, less than 11 months. Next week will be when you all have appointed me last year, November 1st. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, Wednesday. Will be almost a year time when I was appointed. I didn't start work till the 14th, though. And so I just think that those are things I have to bring to this part of the conversation. And I didn't want to digress and say that later. I wanted to say that kind of towards the end of the vote. And so, again, thank you so much for, getting us to this point, board, right? You all has helped me get to this point. And thank you so much to my team who has helped me also get to this point, because I can share a vision. And without, Mr. Chady and Mr. Duff working my vision, in the absence of a business manager, it was me trying to just work the division and work with the departments in many different ways. I just like to say thank you to the team.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Chady, you can definitely roll into the conversation with the tax.
Well, and thank you for those comments, and thank you to Mr. Duff for his involvement and support and onboarding and along the way. I failed to thank another member of our team who's here today, and that's Brooke Walker. Brooke is our grants coordinator within the business office. So you're perhaps looking at her thinking maybe she was with the media. No, she's taking notes because Brooke is also recently enrolled in the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater School Business Management Master's Degree Program. So she's seeking certification to become a school business official in her future as well. So part of her homework assignment is, to participate and take notes and do stuff of this nature. So thanks to Brooke, and just to make those connections for you. Lastly, then, we'll talk a little bit about our tax levy before us, or in particular, our mill rate. So this is a portrayal from the revenue limit worksheet that was attached. If you look to the far bottom right-hand corner of page 1, you'll see the total limited revenue to be used, $10,090, $107. And then it kind of breaks it out here. We're levying $9,126,308 for Fund 10, our general operations purposes. $963,799 for Fund 38, our non-referendum debt. And then the additional $650,000 Fund 80 Community Service Fund. That $650,000 falls outside of the revenue limitation. So thus, when you look down to the far bottom right-hand corner, that number in bold, $10,740,107 is the recommended all-fund tax levy. That's what the budget that you just adopted was built upon. And there's a motion in your board packet, though I'll answer any questions that you have as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Board President Levy, let's start with you.
Well, I didn't have a question. I just had a comment earlier. I wanted to just recognize again with, is it Brooke, our grants administrator, that is the type of building of capacity in an organization when you're fully staffed. So thankful to her and the work that she's done as we've counted the grants, but then also to speak again to the organizational needs that we have. And when we have leadership in place and everyone is in a role, sometimes roles that people don't think are necessary, but these roles are necessary, that we're able to grow. So I received that news of her enrollment for the time that she's with us as a growth for our district, because we have organizational capacity, because there are more people that are knowing and doing. So I'm just thankful to hear that about her own personal achievements.
Thank you so much, Board President Levy, and thank you so much, Ms. Walker. All right, anybody else have any thoughts or questions on the subject of the mill rate?
I didn't
Please.
want to cut anyone off,
ahead.
but I move approval of the 23-24 fiscal year total tax levy of $10,740,107, consisting of the Fund 10 General Operations Tax Levy of $9,126,308, Fund 38 Non-Referendum Tax Levy in the amount of $963,799, and the Fund 80 Community Service Fund Tax Levy of $650,000. And just for any our new board members that may not realize, that does have to be read verbatim for the tax levy.
Thank you so much, Board Member Levy. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion made by Board Member Levy and I'm not going to read it again because she just read it beautifully. Are we good, Ms. Shope? Awesome. And seconded by Board Member Schneider. Are there any additional questions or discussion? All right, Ms. Shope, since the amount is so high, could we please get a roll call vote, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. Tia Johnson,
Aye.
Brian Nichols,
Aye.
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Sean Levy,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Aye.
Greg Schneider,
Aye.
and Megan Miller.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously.
All right, thank you so much. That takes us to adjournment. So if there's no additional board business this evening, is there a motion here at 8:27 p.m. to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion by Nichols, second by Levy. A. Levy. Is there any further discussion? Sorry, bud. You missed it. Yep. All right, all in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Motion passes. We
Aye.
adjourn. Thanks. Have an amazing night.
Good night, everybody.